Aside from the relentless assault of mosquitoes, there was a beauty to the woods that I could see when the world went quiet, and I could see why someone may actually choose to spend their life out here. Even with specific instructions, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. What I did was just follow the current, more or less, and by that logic, I would drift where a body might. After about 2 hours of nothing, I would have just headed back, but seeing the shadow of Laveau Asylum in the distance, I was invigorated with new purpose. It was nearly 3 hours of drifting aimlessly before I managed to find anything odd enough to warrant recording. I turned on the GoPro on my chest when I caught a glint closer to a little pocket of land. When I paddled over, I could see it was someone face down in the swamp. There was no doubt that he was dead. The only thing that was in question was how bloated and gross it would look when I flipped it over. I was the first on the scene, but judging from how out there I was, this scene could have happened a day from now, or a month, or even never. I put on my rubber gloves and proceeded to flip over the face-down corpse. The body was no one I knew, but I didn't expect it to be. Though I'm no expert in forensics, after catching a few bodies here and there, I had knowledge enough to have a few working theories on how long this poor bastard may have been out here. His face was swollen and purple, and his skin hung loose. I knew it was a man from his size, but it was hard to tell from the face alone. I dared to reach for the dead man's wallet to get at least a little more clarity on who this was I was dealing with. It was a man named Janus Marquette, 34 from the date of birth. I held on to the wallet and decided to pick through the pieces of his life. Anything found here may be a clue to what happened to him. If there was a clue to be found, I was not smart enough to put it together. It was just fragments of a life as told through snapshots. This was when I had to make the second big decision. Should I fish him out of the water and lug him back to civilization? There may have been a time when I was squeamish around bodies, but doing the work that I do thickens my skin up nice and hard. This wasn't the issue I had with it in this case. Was I tainting a crime scene? Tampering with evidence? Would I catch some sort of contagious virus if I didn't handle the body correctly? I had all these doubts swirling in my head, but the one thing that cemented my decision was when I thought about my own life and how I'd feel if this was me floating down in the bayou with no one to know if I was alive or dead. I would want someone to care enough to lug me back to my people. I stood on the little boat and could feel every little shift I made disturbing the balance, threatening to capsize. I took one oar and pushed it down as low as it could go, and it stopped waist deep. I figured that if I had to get Janice on the boat, it'd be better to push than to pull. I cautiously eased into the water, but it wasn't cold this time of year. I grabbed the bloated corpse by the shoulders and hoisted him over the boat. I could feel his body creaking and gurgling from the gases, attempting to decompose it and send it back to the earth. I noticed when I pushed Janice's leg on the rowboat, he wasn't wearing shoes. I didn't know the significance of that, but I knew that was a puzzle piece that I just hadn't found the interlocking connection to. I hopped in the boat slowly, and Janice's body rolled over to me limply. I closed my eyes and pushed away the trepidation. He looked at me from his end of the boat with bloated, half-closed eyes. I began to paddle back, but I only had half-remembered landmarks to guide me. I paddled for what I thought was hours, and the shadows lengthened and the sun burned that last bright orange hue that was an indicator to the world it was done for the day. I have to admit, I was beginning to panic because I didn't know if I was close to Guffer or overshot it. All the while, the eyes of Laveau Asylum was boring down on me. It was a structure so imposing that if I truly wanted to, I could easily use that as my beacon and go there. But I knew I was not yet that desperate. In the fading light, with an unimpressed corpse staring at me, I had to make some sort of decision. Finding Harley was still my biggest concern, but as of now, it wasn't my highest concern. Trying to find my way back to civilization before dark was my main concern now. I let the boat drift for a minute and looked around for anything that could give me some clue as to where I was before it was too dark to matter. As I looked over to Janice, his bloated head was in a different position from the turning of the boat, or maybe the long shadows that rolled over his face from the dying light made it appear that way. I had heard that bodies moved and did plenty of odd things when they were decomposing, but I wasn't exactly sure what I was supposed to expect. The smell was pretty bad when I pulled him out of the water, but now it was strong enough that it was making me gag. I contemplated putting him overboard, hoping I found him later, but I'd hold on a bit longer. Maybe there was a way that I could tie a rope to him and drag him in the water. I took off my backpack and began looking for the rope I bought. I felt the boat shift. I looked over the side. I knew that this swamp had gators, and this little boat wasn't big enough to deter them from eating me alive. When I pulled my gaze back from the water, I saw that Janice's leg was twitching as if it were restless. I didn't have a clue if that was a typical occurrence, but it was creeping me the fuck out. I picked up an oar just in case the issue was a bit more complicated than I initially assumed. Something writhed under his pant leg. I tried to stand, but the boat threatened to capsize when I did, so I had to sit back down or hop out altogether. The writhing grew violent, and I raised the oar ready for whatever might happen next. Slowly, emerging from a tear in Janice's pants at the knee, a snake slithered out cautiously. My heart all but stopped. It was at least 2 feet long. I attempted to scoop the thing up with the oar and chuck it off the boat like it were a hockey puck. As I pushed the oar down to wrangle the snake, I felt a resistance. I looked up and the bloated purple hand of Janice held my oar. I pushed back and the boat rocked almost to the point of capsizing. Janice's head craned over to look at me, housing none of the urgency or passion I gave him. He lurched at me, weakly but deliberately, giving me no doubt that this was not part of some bizarre process of decomposition, but something calculated and unnatural. I pushed the oar with 2 hands to lock the corpse in place. The boat violently protested from the jostling. I could feel the snake biting at my ankle, and I had to prioritize it or the undead thing that pushed itself on me. I stood up. I had to risk it. I couldn't fight something like this sitting down. The boat swayed when I raised the oar over my head, and when Janice tried to stand, it rocked quickly to the right. I swung as hard as I could for the creature's head, knowing this would be the only clean shot I'd get. I cracked it on the top of its skull, but had no clue if it was enough before the boat rolled over into the water. I paddled aimlessly away, going in a direction called anywhere but fucking here. After a few quiet moments, I felt something brush up against my body, and suddenly Janice's broken head popped out like a creature in a nightmare. I pushed off the bloated thing, but it didn't move. It just bobbed away. I suppose I cracked it in its head hard enough that it just stayed dead. I looked over to the boat that was completely flipped over and attempted to right it, but even if I did, I didn't know how I would bail the water. I got under the boat and pushed it to a small little oasis. I all but collapsed in the mud, panting. My head was spinning. I felt awful. I was so dizzy I could barely stand. I took a look at my right hand and saw a bite mark on my finger. A fucking bite mark! I flashed back to every piece of zombie media I had ever seen, and I probably had seen most of them, and I knew this was it. I was dead. The only thing that would be able to save me was if I could cut off the infected limb before it spread.